So opticianry, I titled this as our first unit, or the first part of the first unit is opticianry as a legislated profession. And again, I've worked in optometry, I've worked in opticianry, I've worked with OTs, PTs, MDs, I've worked at multi-specialty clinics and osteopathic doctors and dentists, and every single healthcare profession is a healthcare profession because of the laws and the legislations that allow them to do what they have to do. Why can someone go and cut another human being up to treat them? It seems like that's sort of dangerous. You should be qualified. You should have education. You should have training. Well, you do. You must. And there are laws that insist that you have to have the right education and training and background to be able to practice in certain areas in the healthcare arena. And opticianry in Connecticut is no different. So, we have lots of rules. We have lots of laws. We have lots of regulations. In our personal life, we're not supposed to speed. We're not supposed to beat up our neighbor. We're not supposed to hit somebody upside the noggin with a golf club. And obviously, I'm being facetious here. But you don't do it, not because it's just not the right thing to do, which it's not, but there are laws and rules about what you can and what you can't do. Well, just like there's things about what you can and can't do in your personal life, there's things that you can and cannot do, must do, may not do in your professional life. If you're a lawyer, if you're a plumber, if you are a medical doctor, if you are a dentist, if you're an optometrist, and if you are a licensed optician. So eye care is primarily a legislated profession. Think about this statement. And optometry and opticianry and ophthalmology only exist because we have laws and regulations that govern what we can and can't do. They govern what education we're required to have. They govern what experience I have. They govern what tests I must take in order to hold a license. I can't just say, I went to school in another country for optometry, and I'm going to come over to the state of Connecticut and start practicing. There are rules and laws and controls on what you can and can't do. Now, who can practice at one level? What we do is who can prescribe, what can they prescribe, what can they do as part of their profession? Can you as an optician do cataract surgery? Well, the answer is no. Can you prescribe medications? Well, no, you don't have the training. Could you fit and prescribe a controlled medical device? Well, you sort of can, because contact lenses are medical devices and you're allowed to fit contacts from an existing prescription. So you are able to fit contact lenses. That's part of your scope. Many opticians across the country do not have that ability. They don't have that luxury and they don't have that privilege. It's not part of their scope of practice. What limitations? I'm an optometrist. I can do a lot of things from a medical standpoint, but I can't pick up a scalpel and cut into someone's eye and do a retinal surgery or a corneal surgery or a cataract surgery. I have a lot of training. I have a lot of education. I have a lot of certifications. I have a lot of board certifications, but I can't do that because the laws that govern what I do as a professional, as a doctor of optometry, tell me what I can and can't do, and I cannot do invasive, complicated surgeries, especially those that involve scalpels. What are your responsibilities? What must you do? I didn't put this in the presentation today, but if you work with children, if you work with the public, if you work with people, you should be, as a licensed professional, a mandatory reporter. If you feel that one of your patients is at risk or is being abused at home, you have a suspicion, or you know that that's the case, as part of your duties as a patient, that a patient of yours is happening, maybe a child, maybe a female, maybe a spouse of some sort of one of your patients, you are required to report that by law as a mandatory reporter. These are some of your responsibilities and duties, not just what you can do to make more money, but what are you required to do as a responsibility of those, of that licensure of those rules. It's important to know why laws and regulations exist. It's important to know how they can be recreated, or more importantly, this is the more important thing for you guys, how they can be repealed. What happens if you have a law that makes it so you can practice and fit contacts and you're more important, and one day somebody signs it out of existence? You need to know how this works. And quite frankly, I personally, it's how to lobby for it, how to tell lawmakers and interested individuals about what it is that you do and why you do it. So anyway, it's important to know changes in statutes and regulations that affect you can benefit you, or they can adversely affect you. Right now, there are laws all over the country that ophthalmologists are doing to more or less mess with optometrists. The ophthalmologists are trying to say, if you're not a real doctor and didn't go to doctor school, medical school, you can't call yourself a doctor because it's too confusing. So there are doctors of nurse practitionery, doctors of dentistry, doctors of podiatry, doctors of optometry, doctors of chiropractic. They're all different levels and different types of doctors, but none of them went to medical school. So a lot of the physicians are saying you can't call yourself doctor if you didn't go to med school. That's going to be interesting, and that's one of those things where that law could affect all optometrists in every state that it passes, if it passes. What would happen if they change the laws that require you to have a license to be an optician in the state of Connecticut? Me personally, I think it's a terrible idea. As a doctor, I think it's a terrible idea. For my patients, I think it's a terrible idea. For the quality of care that my patients receive, I think it's a terrible idea. For you guys, you would not want that to happen because it would adversely affect your profession. But there's nothing to keep someone from writing a law that will make your license, your training, your education obsolete. So let's go over how we do all this. What are the pros? What are the cons? There is an alphabet soup, that's what I call the lecture, of rules and laws and regulations and agencies. They apply to you. Let's say you're a healthcare professional, like an optician. Let's say you own your own business as a business owner. Let's say you're the boss or the manager or the owner where you employ other people. You as the employee have rights and responsibilities. You name it, everything you do is governed by laws, rules, regulations. Well, the rules, I call them, and they are broken down into different categories. I could literally have an entire 3-credit class. Hell, you could go to a 2-year law degree after you get your undergrad and study everything about laws, rules, and regulations and still not know everything. So we're not going to do a huge, I can't teach you everything you need to know, but I'm going to try to get as much done as we can in the lecture that we have. Start with the basics. What are the rules we have to play by? Some of the rules that we have in society, I mentioned them. Don't steal, don't speed, don't hurt other people, don't commit bank fraud. You get the idea. Don't jaywalk. Some are more serious than others, but they're still rules nonetheless. What are the laws that you have to live by? If you're in a business, federal labor, you guys work. You make a wage. If somebody says, I'm going to pay you $7 an hour, that's less than minimum wage. They can't. Well, why not? Why? Because there's a minimum wage requirement. They can't pay you less because there's a federal Fair Labor Standards Act that sets minimum wages, and some of the states say, I can't go less than minimum wage, but I can go more. So some states implement their own. There's things that you can do on a federal level, national, state level. Yeah. I have equal opportunity laws, can't discriminate, Family Medical Leave Act, federal, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Act. You don't want somebody to get hurt at work, workplace safety standards, workers' comp, if you get hurt at work. Each state has its own different workers' comp rules. Americans with Disabilities Act. There's all sorts of laws and regulations and rules that we have to follow, and I could be here all day, but at least you get the idea. 2 ways for making rules that affect us in a professional setting generally. One are statutes. Those are our laws. When you hear people say, there's a law about that, a statute is simply something that is passed by your elected representatives or your legislators and signed by an executive, governor or president, depending where it is, but it's a statute. That is a law. It is written into law. It's passed as a law. It affects you as a law. There are also regulations, and regulations are, they're still rules, but they are not passed as laws like you normally would say, hey, I passed a law. It is a group. It is a agency that will say, hey, we are charged with making rules and making regulations. So we have a job to do to make things safer for clean water, EPA, safer for banking, Securities and Exchange Commission, safer for drugs that are used to treat sick people, the Food and Drug Administration. They will come up with ideas that they say, this is a good idea. This is why it's a good idea. We're going to make a rule and you have to abide by it. Well, that's a regulation. That's different than a bunch of elected lawmakers coming up with decisions. So these are 2 different ways to write a rule. And let me explain some. Let me show you how they both work. And they're different. They both apply to you, but they're made in 2 different ways. Statutes. Let's start with the statutes. Let's start with how a law. These are passed by legislators. So how do you do? If you and I right now said, I want to make a law that says, let's say we're in the state of Pennsylvania. The state of Pennsylvania does not require opticians to be licensed. We believe, and let's say we all worked in Pennsylvania, we believe that opticians should be licensed. So what we do is we go to the various elected lawmakers, the state senators, the state congresspeople, and we say, we believe that for patient safety, we believe that for better service, we believe that for a better outcome, that opticians as healthcare providers to protect our public and safety should be licensed. So we're going to tell them, and if we convince a lawmaker or two, they'll say, I believe that you're right. That's a fantastic idea. How can I help? And they will become what's called a sponsor of this new idea. It's something we hope becomes a law. And they will sponsor a bill. The bill is the writing. We believe opticians, we want to make a law that says opticians in Pennsylvania will be, need to be licensed and properly educated and properly tested. That person now, and again, there's, without getting into political science and what have you, say in the state of Connecticut, we have the state representatives, like the House of Representatives. We have the state senators. You find one, say, I think you should support this. They'll normally ask some of their buddies, what do you think? Is this a good idea? They think, well, they think it's a good idea. And you want to get multiple people involved in this. So 5, 6, 10, 15 different people. And if enough people think it's a good idea, they will all become sponsors of your bill. Very important to know the lawmakers and be able to communicate with them about what your ask is. Now, when we have in the legislature, there's lots of people doing lots and lots of different things. So what they do is they start breaking into separate committees. There's a committee of a couple lawmakers that deal with everything that has to do with public safety. There's a handful that have to do with finance and banking. There's a handful that all get together and they focus on stuff like healthcare. And for an opticianry bill, you would assume that it would go to the healthcare committee. So there's a small group of the overall legislative group, and they all get together and they start hollering back and forth. This is a good idea. This is a bad idea. I think we should. Other people say, I don't think it's a good idea. And if enough people in that committee say, you know what, we all agree, or at least half of us agree that this is a good idea, the committee recommends that the entire House of Representatives or the entire Senate take that up and discuss it and vote on it. So if the bill was suggested and it goes into committee and then it is approved and comes out of committee, that's a big step in the process. They analyze, they research, they discuss, they make changes to the wording in case somebody doesn't like the wording, and then it will go to a vote to the broader House. So the entire House of Representatives in the state of Connecticut, or in our case, we'll use the Pennsylvania idea, the House of Representatives will all say, we all think, or at least half of us think this is a good idea. Well, you have to do it in the other chambers. Then the Senate has to do the same thing. There's 2 elected bodies, Senate and House of Representatives normally, if you know anything about when you elect your local or your state representatives. If half the people, if it made it out of committee, you have the sponsors, it made it out of committee, and the House of Representatives says, we think that's a good idea. We go back to the Senate, we show them the same bill or a similar bill. They vote and say, we think it's a good idea. They'll look at that bill, they both pass, they'll hand it to the governor of Pennsylvania. If the governor of Pennsylvania says this is a brilliant idea, governor signs it off, he or she signs off on it, and now we have a law, licensed opticians, and there is a license for opticians in Pennsylvania. That's how the process works. Now, how could it get stopped? You can't find sponsors, doesn't work. If you and I said we want opticians to do cataract surgery, you'd find no sponsors. If it went into the chamber, the committee, the healthcare committee, there's enough people that know enough about healthcare that, and other interested parties, optometrists, ophthalmologists, medical doctors would say that is the most inane thing I've ever heard. They would tell the lawmakers, and it would never see the light of day. It would never leave committee. It would never leave the committee. And if it ever made it to the House vote, if you have a bill and it's a good idea, but you don't have enough people to support it and it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass. And finally, if it passes the legislators, the House and the Senate, and the executive says this is not a good bill, and he or she vetoes it, it doesn't become law. So there's a lot of steps you have to follow. So if we went to Pennsylvania as a group, and when Connecticut came over and helped them out, and the other states helped them out, and they all came together and found a sponsor, went into the healthcare committee in the legislators. It came out. We wrote the language. We wrote it, and it came out of committee, and then it voted, and House and Senate all voted to pass it, and the governor signed it. There would be licenses, licensed opticians in that state. And there are 30 states you could do that with that don't have it right now. This is all the process is. Now, if you want, there's all sorts of laws and regulations. I put them all here. You can have federal laws and you can have state laws. Here's a list of you can click on it. I'll give you the PowerPoints. We're not going to belabor this point. There are laws related to everything: banking and roads and safeties and building codes and criminal codes, and you name it. There's laws for everything in the state of Connecticut that apply to us in Connecticut. There are laws that apply to everybody in the whole country. Those are the federal laws. They're on a national level, and they apply to everybody. Well, if there is a law that is a federal law, it applies to everybody. If there's a law that's not specific enough, each state has areas where they can write their own laws and do their own thing. But if you live in the state of Connecticut, federal law you have to follow. And if there's a state law, you got to follow. You can't say, well, I get to pick and choose. You're subject to all the federal laws. And then in the state of Connecticut, you're subject to all the Connecticut laws. There's a licensed optician requirement in the state of Connecticut. If you are practicing in Pennsylvania, you can call yourself an optician and not have a license. Why? Because the laws in Connecticut don't apply to you, and there is no federal law that requires opticians to be licensed on a national level. There just isn't. That's not how healthcare works. I'm an optometrist. I have my degree from optometry school. I passed all my boards. When I came to Connecticut, I told them I applied for licensure. I showed them all of my paperwork, and they eventually gave me a license to practice optometry in the state of Connecticut. Even though I'm a licensed optometrist, able to practice in Connecticut, I could not go to Massachusetts and work as an optometrist because I'm not licensed in that state. I have to follow their laws instead. Licensing laws for health professionals are done on a state by state by state basis. That's just how it's done. Anybody who says we just need to pass a national law, good luck. That's generally not how it's done. Once it's signed, it becomes law, and then it can be enforceable. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but there is a backdoor approach to passing a law. You can actually add a provision that you would like on a bill that has nothing to do with what the original bill was for. If you attach language to an existing bill that's unrelated and that bill passes, your little clause will pass. Let me give you an example. In 2005, West Virginia, there is a bill to limit the number of members that cities can appoint to a board of recreation, and somebody had the bright idea. Most states don't have, no state and no national official language exists. English, it's the most popular, it's the most common, it's the most widely used, but it's not an official language of the United States or even of a state. Somebody in West Virginia said, I am going to write a little clause in this crazy little small bill that has nothing to do with it, and we're going to make English the official language of the state of West Virginia. And it actually passed. Nobody caught it. It got to the governor's desk, and when they saw it, they said, are you kidding me? And they ended up vetoing it. You could have somebody who doesn't want licensure in the state of Connecticut to write licensure is no longer applicable in Connecticut and put it in a food safety bill. If you don't see it coming and nobody's watching and you don't have paid lobbyists and legislative specialists watching to protect and advance your profession, it could be taken out with a simple insertion of the right language in a totally unrelated bill. You always have to be at the table, paying attention, being involved. And my favorite quote always: if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. So anyway, we always need somebody: optometrists, lawyers, medical doctors, public workers, social workers, teachers. Everyone always has folks looking at bills. They're looking to find bills that'll affect them, looking to make sure nobody's sneaking in riders, and if they have something they want to pass, they're looking for sponsors for their bills. That's what we do in the state of Connecticut, as we do on a national level for all the various professions. Opticianry should be no exception. A couple years back, Massachusetts optometrists, in Massachusetts, they passed a law that says that optometrists can treat glaucoma with eye drops. It's strange because all optometry has been able to do that since 1973, and it turned out that 49 states for years, decades, were able to do that. Just Massachusetts wasn't along. Weren't able to change their law that says that they could, as optometrists, treat glaucoma, even though every state had been doing it for 50 years. So that would be decades. They were just behind the 8 ball. Now, in this case, I just say that because it's to demonstrate, again, there aren't national standards oftentimes. It's a state-by-state decision. So people, if you've seen them online or opticians on Facebook, we need national licensure. That's simply not how it's done. So optometry, my question isn't, well, how do they do it? My question is, why did it take so long? If other states have been doing it since 73, why did it take till 2021 for Massachusetts optometrists to do that? So anyway, take home for statutes and laws. They're passed by elected officials. They can be federal laws. They can be passed by the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. And then they're signed by the president, and that's a federal law. It's now official. It's a law that has to be adhered to by everybody who lives in the United States. Or you can have state-by-state laws specifically. And in our case, the state of Connecticut has our Senate, the state of Connecticut has our House of Representatives. If a bill is passed that affects Connecticut residents and it's signed by the governor, it's a state law. That's how they work. And then you can have local and city ordinances. If you live in a bigger city like New Britain or Hartford, or even like in another state, Boston or New York, they sometimes have state or local laws that also apply to you. I'm not getting into the weeds, but there can be local, state, or federal laws. You have to abide by all of them. If they disagree, generally the higher level wins. So if I have a state law, but a federal law says something different, generally the federal law wins out. But that's that's for another day for us to talk about. So again, let's go back to the rulemaking process. There's statutes, like we just talked about, but there's also regulations. And a regulation is something where you have an agency of some sort, either a federal agency, which they have, or a state agency, which they can have, and they will make rules based on existing laws. You may have a law that says, we need these agencies to make the rules and enforce them. Great. Or they may say, here's the laws, and the agency may say, well, in order to reinforce or enforce these laws, I have to make rules that make sense and enforce them. So they're rules and policies and procedures that are made by an agency, and even though they're not actual laws, they're still as enforceable as a past statute is. And that's why I just use the overall rules. It can be a statute or it can be a regulation. So what are some ideas of regulations? Regulations are standards and rules adopted by agencies that determine how laws can be interpreted or how they should be best done. Securities and Exchange Commission, why you can't do insider trading. FTC, you want competition in the marketplace. Why Spirit Airlines was almost purchased by JetBlue and it fell through because they said there wouldn't be enough competition. That was the FTC. They said there's not enough competition. You've also got the FDA. If I have a new medication and I need to make sure it passes safety, and we're going to do FDA approval. If it passes approval, I will approve it for use for patients as long as it does what we says it does. It does what the manufacturer says it does, and they've passed enough tests to make sure it's safe. Department of Public Health, we have state Department of Public Health, etc. You get the idea. There's states, agencies, and there's national agencies, and they will make rules and we have to follow them. Now, again, they can be federal, they can be state, sometimes you can have local. If you've ever seen these in where you work, these little posters, these are required by the Federal Department of Labor about what your workplace standards, what your rights and responsibilities are. And the rule for this is, as long as you have at least one employee, you have to have this up in your break room. You have to have it in clearly documented. If you don't have these and you're an employer, your employer could get in trouble because it's a federal regulation from the Department of Labor. If you violate it, they could get in trouble. These are the rules that they put up and you have to follow. And again, if you're a manager and you don't have those up there, get them up. If you're a business owner, get them up. And again, Homeland Security, Commerce, Labor, Transportation, Interior, Justice. And you're like, geez, Cito, why are you doing all this? I'm here for opticianry. Well, because there are some that affect you as opticians. So, which ones do we have to deal with? Well, it turns out that there are some that deal specifically with opticianry and eye care in general. The FTC, they can be on your case. They affect how you practice. The FDA affects how you practice. OSHA affects how you practice. And as far as opticianry goes in the state of Connecticut, there's a regulation, there's an agency called the Department of Public Health. that affects how you practice opticianry. It affects you as an optician. So, what are some of the eye care specific regulations or laws? Let's go through some of them, and I'll show you why FTC, FDA, Connecticut Department of Public Health, OSHA, how these all affect you as an eye care provider. Now, eye care specific. This is a rule, the eyeglass release rule. Technically, it is the ophthalmic practice rule. We also call it the prescription release rule, or the eyeglass prescription release rule. And it turns out that the Federal Trade Commission back in the day, back in the 70s, was upset that a lot of doctors were doing free exam with a pair for the purchase of a pair of glasses. Someone would go get their exam, they'd buy the glasses, but then they'd say, I'd like a copy of my prescription. The doctor would say, no, you can't have it. And they said, that's their record, it's their stuff. You can't hold it from them. And so they made a law, and the doctors would argue, hey, I gave them a free exam for them to buy a pair of glasses. I'm only doing it for free because I want them to buy a pair of glasses. And it's potentially a reasonable argument. However, the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, said that is no good. You are required, we're going to make a rule as a federal agency that you must give a copy of the eyeglass prescription at the conclusion of the exam, And that is a rule. They made it and they enforce it. And if the doctors don't give them a physical copy of the prescription at the end of the exam, they could ostensibly be in trouble because they're not following the letter of the law, the letter of the rule. It's called the eyeglass release rule. In a nutshell, requires eye care provider, could be an optometrist, can be an ophthalmologist. They must release a free copy of the RX at the conclusion of the eye examination. It doesn't mean you don't have to pay for the process. If you have to pay for an exam and pay for the refraction, which is part of the exam, you still have to pay for it. But to write out a copy of the prescription, you can't charge them extra. You can't say, hey, it's going to be $20 for me to print out and give it to you. That you can't do. So you can charge them for the process, or you can charge their insurance, or someone may have to pay for it. But once it's paid, you can't charge to give them a copy of their medical record, their copy of their prescription. You have to give them a free copy at the conclusion of the exam. You can't require a purchase of ophthalmic goods as a condition of the exam. You can't have any type, you can't say, hey, you could get them somewhere else, but if you get them somewhere else, they may not be made right. You're not allowed to have them sign that. I think that's a silly part. I don't tell you I'm not telling you what I think, I'm telling you what the rule says. And this, if you're ever not sure, and this is how I love what I love to do, this is in the Code of Federal Regulations. And it is Part 456, Authority 15 U.S.C. 57A, 5 U.S.C. 552, Source 57, FR 818822, May 1st, 1992. This is literally the law. Read it. And it says, you cannot use a waiver or disclaim liability. Like, that's not me saying it, whether they should or have it. This is what the rule says. So if anybody ever says, you must, it is unfair act or practice to fail to provide a patient one copy of the patient's prescription immediately after the eye exam is completed. Period. Anybody who says, well, that's not the law, this is the law. Like, I'm showing you the actual law. So again, if someone says this is the law, you should at any given time be able to tell them if they're right or wrong. So let's keep going. There's also not just an eyeglass release law, but it turned out years later, about 10, 20 years, 30 years later, 20 years later, people were asking for the contact lens prescription, and the optometrists and the eye doctors were saying again, no. Why were they saying no? They said the rule you made from the FTC says I have to give them the eyeglass prescription. Doesn't say anything about the contact lens prescription. This was so irritating to some lawmakers that they actually passed a federal law that says, not the FTC passing a rule, but the federal government, the U.S. Congress, the U.S. Senate, passed a law called the Fairness to Contact Lens Consumer Act in 2003. And instead of the FTC mandating it, it was passed by the U.S., passed by the Senate. These are all the sponsors, because I talked about sponsors. And then when they were all voted and everybody, Democrat, Republican, all agreed, they sent it to the executive, which at that time for the United States was my man George W. Bush back in 2003. So he signed that law. And so now there's a federal law that says that you must give a copy of the prescription at the conclusion of the contact lens fit. Now, just recently, and it's not in the slides, but they made a new rule and this is one of those things I'm going to ask you in the homework. The new rule is not only do you have to show that you gave a copy of it, I can't just write I used to just write in the record or give them a copy or just, it was in my electronic health records. There's now a requirement for the law, and the FTC has interpreted it this way, that their interpretation of this law, they changed the requirement, and now if you give a finalized copy of the contact lens prescription, if you give a copy of the contact lens prescription, you must have the patient sign a piece of paper saying that they physically received a physical copy, and you must keep that on file for 3 full years in case the FTC comes knocking. It's a federal law, but it is enforced by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. So if the FTC comes knocking at my door as an optometrist and they say, I saw you fit 100 patients, I want to get those 100 patients, show me that they have a piece of paper saying that they received it, a physical copy of their prescription. If you don't have it, we're going to hold you and we're going to punish you. We're going to fine you. We're going to get you in big trouble. There are some exceptions about how you can do it through electronic health records, and we're not going to get into the specifics here. There is, but you can do it on an online portal, but you must have their express permission saying that you can share it that way to make sure that it's legal. You just can't send it to them on their email. It doesn't satisfy the requirement. So anyway, let me show you the difference though. I have the eyeglass release rule, which was made by the FTC and enforced by the FTC. I have the contact lens release law, the Fairness to Contact Lens Consumers Act law, which was passed by the US government as a federal law, but it's enforced by the FTC. Even though one's a rule, one's a law, one's a regulation. I should be more specific about that. Even though one's a regulation and one's a statute, they're both rules that we have to follow. So let me get back to where I was going. I apologize for that. So again, one of the questions could be, well, this was a regulation passed by the FTC. So even though, since it's not a real law, I don't have to listen to it. Yes, you do. You are bound by following all federal and state regulations as much as you are required to follow all state and federal statutes or federal laws. I use the word laws and statutes interchangeably. Eyeglass lenses should not be dangerous. It sounds silly, but it makes sense. We used to use glass material, not plastic, but before CR39, before poly, before Trivex, we had crown glass and photogray extra, which is a photochromatic glass. And if you had glass in its natural state and ground it with the right curves, we've done grinding curves before, we've edged lenses before, well, they would do that for glass, and they would be prone to break at times. It turns out that they had methods, they came up with methods to treat the lens, to temper the lens, either using heat methods or chemical, and you can read about that in your systems book about how the heat, they would heat it up to about 1200 degrees to the point it was almost melted, and it would be actually heating up and it would be expanding. They would take it out of a hot oven just to the point before it melted. They'd cool the outside with a jet of air, and the outside would cool. The inside would continue to expand, so it created a compression zone, so it made it less likely to break. It was almost like making it safety glass. It's still glass, it still can break, more so than, say, polycarbonate, but it wouldn't break into the same number of small shards. There's another way you could temper it using chemical means. You put it in a salt bath, not a sodium chloride bath, but a chemical salt bath, and it would replace some of the ions. And there's potassium, and there's sodium, and there's all sorts of, and the bigger ones replace the smaller ones, and it actually makes it a more durable lens, or a more impact resistant lens. And it turns out that the federal government says, if we have something for glass lenses that's safer, we're going to require that opticians and optometrists and anyone who sells glasses have to use those safer lenses. So in 1972, a federal agency determined that glass lenses should be required to be tempered so that they're less dangerous. And not only did they have to be tempered, but then you had to test them to make sure that they were safe, and document that you did these tests and to prove that they're impact resistant. Now, talked about federal organizations. Which federal organization? The Food and Drug Administration for eyeglass lenses. Yes, that's right. The Food and Drug, glasses are not a food. Glasses are not a drug. But spectacle lenses and safety falls under the medical devices area, and the Food and Drug Administration has control and they have jurisdiction over medical devices. So if you have a new laser, if you have a new surgical technique, if you have a new implant of something from your mom's shoulder surgery or your dad's knee surgery, those are medical devices and the FDA must approve those. So medical devices and drugs are both covered. And since eyewear and the eyeglass lenses were considered a possible danger, the FDA made a rule to require impact resistance testing for ophthalmic or eyeglass lenses. FDA impact resistance for lenses. So again, if you want, I always cite my sources. This is from the FDA.gov, the impact resistant lenses, questions and answers. I will leave it to you to read this, or if somebody argues about what they can or can't do or must not do, you'll say, guess what? I know where the law is. Knock it off. And it turns out that in a dress eyewear, not Z87 safety, not OSHA approved safety, not safety eyewear for industrial purposes on a work site to keep you from poking your eye out, but regular eyeglass lenses for just everyday wear have to be drop ball tested, especially if they're glass, and I'll get that in a minute. And the test procedure is you take a 5/8 inch steel ball, you drop it down a little tube, and it has to go 50 inches, and it has to weigh approximately 0.56 ounces, and when it drops 50 inches, it accelerates, it hits the lens at the very bottom, and if it hits the center of the lens, and the lens does not break, it passes the test. If you generated the lens and you edged the lens and you tempered the lens and you drop balled the lens, if it broke, you got to start over and do the whole thing over again. And this is to ensure that the lens passes a minimum safety standard or impact resistance standard for eyeglass lenses. Plastic lenses, so anybody who's made lenses, we don't drop ball every single pair of glasses that we make. We don't have to. We don't. The law allows plastic and polycarbonate and Trivex are so impact resistant that you don't have to test every pair that's individual of the regular materials. The manufacturer can take a whole host of lenses and take a handful out of those. They'll batch test them. And as long as they can show that they batch tested the lenses to make sure that they're safe, you've met the requirement. So plastic CR39, high index, Trivex polycarbonate, you don't have to drop ball every single pair. Those, the vendor, the manufacturer of the lens will batch test them for you and document that. So you don't have to drop ball every pair of glasses you make. But you do if they're glass. If you've made a glass lens, crown glass, index 1523, if you have photo gray extra glass, if you have Corning thin and dark, we don't do many glass lenses in the year 2024. But even in the 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, we had a fair number. It was still something we have to do. And if you can even reasonably assume that maybe somebody's going to order a glass lens from you, you need to know this because it is a federal regulation. So if you make a glass lens in an ophthalmic frame of pair of spectacles, it has to be drop ball tested. There's always an exception. So the exceptions are as follows. Prism segments, certain types of multifocal slab-off prisms, lenticulars, isoconic, lenticulars, myodiscs, laminated, meaning if it was like a polarized glass lens, for example. There are ones where you would either ruin it or it's so likely that it's not going to pass drop ball that they won't make you do it because it would be too expensive. But there are exemptions, maybe for testing. They may ask you these, but for the most part, my take home is glass lenses, unless they're an exception, must be all tested individually, every single pair drop ball, using this protocol, and it has to be kept on record. So here's my favorite of all time. If you were in my class right now, I would terrorize the absolute bejesus out of you. HIPAA, HIPAA. If you look online or opticians on Facebook or anybody else are like HIPAA, it's HIPPA. It's not. HIPAA. And a lot of people, it's a Health Information Privacy Act, something or other. No, it's not. It's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. You don't see information there and you don't see privacy there. That's not what the law was for. The law was for, and this is from the bill, to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to improve portability and continuity of health insurance coverage in the group and individual markets, to combat waste, fraud, and abuse in health insurance and healthcare delivery, to promote the use of medical savings account, to improve access to long-term care services and coverage, to simplify the administration of health insurance, and for other purposes. No privacy, and there's no information there. It's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Now, if you read the whole bill, one of the things they wanted to do was back in 1996, they wanted to take advantage of this whole newfangled interwebs thing for healthcare. They wanted to use more technology. Well, that scared the heck out of some people. And they said, well, if we have a lot of information just out there in the ether for insurance purposes and porting your insurance from one company to another, because I can't go from one company to another because I can't bring my health insurance, it's too difficult. But if they made it easier, it's better for the consumer, it's better for the worker. But if there's too much of that information all over the place, how do we keep it from falling in the wrong hands? And we have to be very careful about who we share it with and how we do it as healthcare professionals and as hospitals and insurers. So they put a lot of fail-safes about who you can share the information with and when you can share it and when you cannot share it. And there are exceptions about when you have to share it. If you get subpoenaed by a court, you can't say, oh, there's HIPAA. There are reasons and exceptions, and I have a whole handout there that I'd like you to read. I won't cover that in this lecture, but you can read through it. This is important that you understand this, because somebody asks for their record, you got to give it to them. If somebody's wife asks for their husband's record, if you don't have a signed release, you're not allowed to give them the record. If little Johnny, 18 years old, is an adult, and mommy does all his appointments and mommy takes care of everything, if she asks for his records and she made the appointment and she drives him, unless he gives you specific permission to give stuff to his mom, you're not allowed to share. Once he gives you permission, written, and you're all set, but common sense does not trump here. There are very specific rules. I need you to know these inside and out as healthcare professionals. I'll leave these. You can read these on your own. Here are the permitted uses and disclosures when required by law. Obviously, public health activities. If you have an outbreak of TB, you can't just say, I can't give anybody information. I have to give those statistics. You have to give them. Victims of abuse or neglect. If you think that someone's getting hurt or abused, you can't say, well, HIPAA, I'm not going to tell anybody. You're a mandatory reporter, and you are not bound by HIPAA if you suspect that someone's a victim of abuse. And there's a whole bunch of other ones. Keep going, keep going, keep going. So anyway, I won't go through these. I want you to read, maybe I'll have you read them. But somebody wants to charge for a PD. Somebody comes into your office. They have their eyeglass prescription. They don't want to buy from you. They want you to give them the PD. Or let's say it came from your office. They want you to take their PD and write it down for you. You say, I'll do it, but do it for $50. And they say, no, you must give it to me. Some states require it as part of their record, but not all of them. So if you're in a state that doesn't require that the doctor writes it down, you as the optician or they as the doctor could charge somebody for taking it. And again, consumer.ftc.gov, that's where they are. I'll cite the sources, and you can read through this. You may provide the doctor may provide the PD, but in most cases, unless the state law says that they have to, they don't have to. If the state law says they do, they can go over and beyond. Most many don't charge on people at a distance, but if they do charge for it, some places will reimburse you. So again, if you're not sure, ask the FTC. There's a lot of frequently asked questions there. But as of right now, if you decide to charge for a PD, there is no prohibition for that for you as an optician to charge for a PD. Patient was given trial lenses at an eye exam with instructions to follow up in the clinic 1 to 2 weeks to make sure it was the right one. It's a follow-up. 5 months later, they call back, said, I want them. I think they're fine. And the doctor says, I'm not giving you because you didn't follow my directions to come back for a follow-up. I'm not giving the prescription. And they say, but you have to. You need to give me my prescription. Well, the FTC says that you don't have to release it if they didn't follow through the fit. It's at the completion of the fit. If they didn't come back like you instructed and you never finished the fit, there's no prescription to give them. Now, again, it's all in the spirit of the law. If you said, I'll finalize it if you buy from me, but not if you go somewhere else, that's not the same. If you were gonna approve it for anybody, you have to approve it for everybody. You can't just say, well, you didn't do it and follow up with me, so I'm not going to give it to you, but if you buy them from me, I'll give it to you. That's an absolute violation of the spirit of that law. You'd get in trouble. ANSI, ANSI, hopefully you know what it stands for at this point. It is the American National Standards Institute, and they are, we think about them in eyeglasses and safety glasses. Well, it turns out that there are enough ANSI standards to sink a small boat. It's a private organization, the American National Standards Institute. It's not a government. It's a private organization. It develops voluntary standards for every industry and product and service and system you can think of. Anything. It has construction safety, ladder safety, clothing, air movement, Ladder Institute, Association of Medical Instrumentation, plastics industry, ropes course association. That sounds cool. Like if you do those courses, there's literally a voluntary standard for everything you can think of. The exit sign by class, the seat you're sitting in, the computer monitor you have, there are ANSI standards that govern that. We don't worry about all of them. We only worry about the ones that have to do with eyeglasses. And there are ANSI standards for contact lens terminology, non-prescription sunglasses, eyeglass frames, intraocular lenses for after cataract surgery, low vision devices. In 2017, ready-to-wear readers had ANSI standards. Slit lamps, you get the idea. There's an ANSI standard for everything. Do I want you to know them all? No. Which ones do I want you to know? I want you to know Z80.1-2020. And I want you to know Z87-1 at 2020. The first one is the chapter, and the second one is what year it was last updated. And these are generally updated every 5 years. So I'm expecting another update in about 2 or 3 years, 2025. Z80.1, ophthalmics, prescription ophthalmic lenses. How accurate are the glasses? You order them from the lab sends them back. These are the standards. So when you have that little piece of paper next to you, like this, next to your lensometer, and here's I can't print it for you, but there's an open link for you. I ordered a pair of glasses, and here's the prescription. Here's how much I'm allowed to be off. Here's the cylinder, how much I'm allowed to be off. These are voluntary standards made by a very expert group of professionals, but they are voluntary standards. It's very important you understand that. Sort of. Let me keep going. They're voluntary standards used by industry, all sorts of industries, but let's use this as an example. If your lab puts out a pair of eyeglasses and they're outside of American National Standards Institute, the Z80.1, and your manager says, just dispense it, it's voluntary only. Can you do it? And the answer is, you can pause this and think about it. The answer is, it depends on the state. And the reason I say that is, there's a law in the state of Connecticut. We have federal and state laws on how we have to do. There is Chapter 381 of the Connecticut General Statutes. Those have to do with our laws as opticians. Chapter 381, everything that's in there. And in that chapter that says what you must do as a licensed optician in the state of Connecticut, as a licensed optician in the state of Connecticut, the quality of optical lenses, spectacles, eyeglasses, optical appliances or instruments, and other aids to vision and kindred products of optical glasses shall meet whichever of the following standards may be applicable, including the American National Standards Institute Z80. That means in the state of Connecticut, if you're a licensed optician working at an optical shop permit, you are required by state law to ensure that every single pair meets American National Standards Z80 every time, and that is a state law. What they did was they took voluntary standards and they said, we're going to make a state law that adopts those voluntary standards and makes them mandatory for opticians in the state of Connecticut. This is going to blow your mind. Optometrists are not subject to Chapter 381. They have their own laws, Chapter 380. They're not required to make sure that they meet ANSI standards. They're not subject to your optician laws, just like you're not subject to optometry laws as you practice an optician. So it's a minor nuance, and maybe we'll talk about that in the discussion board. It's one of my favorite nuances, but you as a licensed optician are required by state law to ensure that every pair of glasses meets ANSI standards. So if you're the license of record, don't just dispense them, don't just hope for the best. You are required to make sure they shall meet the following standards. If you're going to practice in Massachusetts, which is also a licensed state, they have 235 Mass Regulation 5.02. They have another one. They adopted the voluntary standards for the ANSI and said, we're going to make sure that we're going to adopt a voluntary standard to make it a state standard, a state law, a state requirement that the glasses meet those standards. So it's not just a suggestion for you as a licensed optician in the state of Connecticut or a licensed optician in the state of Massachusetts. You are required to make sure that those glasses pass those standards. So that's what this just says. Connecticut, Mass, they co-opted a voluntary standard. Now, it's interesting because there's another ANSI standard that we're interested in. And it potentially is a voluntary standard, but somebody took it and made it not voluntary, and they said, we're going to make it into a real law. Which one is it? Well, Z87, safety eyewear. Who would do such a thing? The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the people who try to keep you safe at work. They're a federal bureaucracy, a federal agency, and if you mess with them, you get in big trouble. OSHA wants to make sure you don't fall off a roof. OSHA wants to make sure you don't have a trip hazard. OSHA wants to make sure you don't die or get maimed or get hurt at work. Because of that, they mandate specific safety requirements all over, from exit signs to head protection to eye and face protection. Z87, and again, if you don't believe me, let's go to OSHA regulations under the Department of Labor, Standards 29 CFR, Part 1910, OSHA Standards, Subpart 1, 1910-133, eye and face protection, and here it is. The Department of Labor says through OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, that if protective eye and face protection devices must comply with any of the following consensus standards. ANSI Z87.1, and they've updated 2020. And all of these, so right here it says ANSI Z87. So they've co-opted what should have been a voluntary, or was originally intended to be a voluntary standard, but a federal agency says we want to make sure things are safe. And instead of us making our own rule and our own regulations and our own standards, we're going to take already established ones and we're going to adopt them. And now it's a federal regulation, period. And if you're not sure, if somebody doesn't believe you, here's where you can find it. So again, this is where it boils down to. If you just read these slides, although ANSI is technically a voluntary standard, it can be used in statutes or regulations to become enforceable law. And again, state optical statutes, Z80, accuracy of eyeglass lenses. OSHA regulation, Z87 eye protection. They took voluntary standards and made them law and adopted them, and they are now enforceable as law. Again, if somebody wants dress or non-safety lenses put in their Z87 stamped frame, the answer should be no. So let's move on from ANSI. Let's move on from OSHA. Let's go on to a new group called ASTM, the American Society of Testing Materials. Sports glasses. Each sport may have its own different designation. So if I click on this, I have a neat little, you can purchase their standards. It's a long book. They're different standards from different sports. So these are some common ones. If you've recognized these, maybe you sell them. Hilco has Leader Sports. Liberty Optical has Rec Specs. And there's a specific requirement, F803. The F803 is for squash, tennis, basketball, badminton, handball, cricket, you name it. And these are specifically for these sports. It turns out that they're different glasses for different sports. So if you had, say, football glasses, there is a different designation. What works for one sport may not be appropriate for another one. So these are ASTM, F803 for the rec specs. You'll normally see that. ASTM Association, the American Society of Testing Materials is who is in charge of setting standards for athletic protective eyewear, sports eyewear. Can you use ASTM F803 glasses that are safe or recommended or designed for sports and wear them on the job for Z87 for OSHA purposes? The answer is no. Can I use Z87 safety glasses and wear them for sports? That's not what they're meant for. They're two different animals, so I would not recommend that. That's not appropriate. Here's my favorite, and it is always my favorite. What is the law that requires the use of poly or Trivex or high impact resistance for minors? And the answer is there isn't one. Well, there are rules, statutes, and regulations that we have to follow, but there's even more stuff we have to contend with. There's what's called standard of care. In a healthcare profession, if a standard of care is the standard by which would be exercised by a reasonably prudent professional in that line of work. Would a reasonable, prudent, licensed optician in the state of Connecticut order a glass lens for a 10-year-old child? The answer is hell to the no. Now, there's no law that says you can't. However, if you're in violation of that, two things would happen. One, you'd be open to a civil liability. You probably wouldn't go to jail, but you would be sued by the family if someone was injured. And secondly, you could be brought in front of the Board of Examiners, the people who give you your license, and they could suspend or revoke your license for behavior and practice that is so beyond what is acceptable that they could take your license away and they could fine you and you could be sued. It's not a law. It's not a statute. It simply is what we call standard of care. High impact materials in my personal, if they were going to ask me to say testify against somebody, children with contact lenses, I would say that you have to weed them out and screen them and train them properly and make sure they're appropriate. Adults in sports, are you wearing the right eyewear? Did you recommend it? Children with contacts in sports, safety glasses over contact lenses at work around the house, extended wear complications. There are things that high impact lens materials for minors and patients that only have one eye. If I only have one eye, I want them in a safety pair of eyewear with polycarbonate impact resistant or Trivex lenses. That is a reasonable, prudent thing that a professional would know to do. So these are all the things. Duty to warn is when you should warn them about the products that are available. If they choose to wear them, as long as you document it, have them sign, you should be exempt from most civil liability. Informed consent, if I'm going to do a procedure, if I'm going to do something, they should know the risks involved before they do it. Informed consent, if you go get surgery, if you get something else happen, permission granted in the knowledge of the possible consequences. So if you're going to get services or surgery or fit, as long as they know, as long as you've documented that they know and are aware of the potential drawbacks, you should be fine. So you can document in your record, but you should also have a signed copy is even better for informed consent. All right, now we're going to come down the home stretch. Scope of practice. In Connecticut, all licensed opticians are allowed to fit contacts without the oversight of a doctor. In 29 states, there's no certification licensure requirement at all for opticians. Why is there a difference? I've given you an article called The State of Opticianry by Marianne Santos in 2020, article about 3 years ago, and this is a table from there. The table is every state in Connecticut, and it has whether the state is licensed or not. Alabama has no licenses for opticians. Alaska does. Arizona does. On and on and on. Take a look at Connecticut. Yes, I have a license. You have a license to practice opticianry. It's required to practice. Can you fit contact lenses? No, no, yes, yes, yes. Well, it's interesting because I don't know if you can notice this, but I want you to look at this very carefully in your homework. Anybody who can fit contact lenses can do so because they have a license. There's no one in this list that can fit contacts that doesn't also require a license. There's nobody who just says, oh, I can fit contacts. You must have a license. It increases your ability to have a scope. Also, take a look. Everyone who has the ability to have a license in their optician, yes, yes, yes. Is there a state association or society in that state? Yes for licensure, yes for licensure, yes for licensure, yes for licensure. As far as I'm aware, and you can do this here on your own, I don't believe there's any state that has a license that doesn't have a state society. I believe it's 100%. And for all those who don't have a license, I believe about 66% of them also don't have a state society. So think about that, what that means, and that's part of your homework. What does that mean for the importance of you joining or establishing or supporting a state society or national society to advance your profession and allow you to do more with what you can do in your profession? I think it's self-explanatory, but I'll have you think about that. And again, we've traditionally understood that the 3 O's, ophthalmologist, OD, optometrist, and opticians. Ophthalmologists can perform surgery. Optometrists used to not, but now we can. Certain ones, I can take foreign bodies out, like a piece of metal in there. I can take it out with a spud, with an anesthetic. I can do an algae brush, which is like a Dremel. I can actually do a handful of minor surgical procedures, which I couldn't have done 30 or 40 years ago. Opticians, we can do eyeglasses, we can do contacts, we can do low vision, as long as I have a prescription from an optician or an optometrist or an ophthalmologist. No optician, as far as I'm aware of, in the United States of America has the scope of the ability to do a refraction on their own and make a pair of glasses for them. You can't do that because the state laws don't allow for it. You have to have a contact lens or an eyeglass prescription. You have to have an eyeglass prescription from a doctor before you can do that. Now, I'm going to go on a soapbox, and I'm going to keep you for a few more minutes. Pharmacists over the last 2 decades, they used to just push pills. Now they can prescribe some medications. They can give vaccines. They can inject things. Nurses. I used to be just a nurse changing the bed pad 50, 60, 80 years ago. Now we have registered nurses. We have licensed practical nurses. We have nurse practitioners. We have doctors of nurse practitioners. We have nurse anesthesiologists. They can do unbelievable things with the scope of practice that they have. They're acting very much like medical doctors and used to act in the past. Optometrists, same thing. I'm going to use this idea of optometrists. This is not something that just happened because it was a good idea. It happened because these professions were organized. They had standardized education. They had tireless efforts on lobbying and legislative on a state and national level. It didn't just happen. So optometry back in the day, before 1910, there was no such thing as an optometry degree. Before 1951, there was no test for optometry. Before 1971, this is going to be weird, but no optometrist could put a drop in a patient's eyes. It was illegal. It wasn't part of their scope. Rhode Island, they went from state to state to state and got it in their education. They decided to pursue it. They put it in their 4-year degree. They started getting the education, and then they started showing what they could do and how trained they were and how safe they were. And in 1971, Rhode Island passed the first diagnostic pharmaceutical agent. The first time that an optometrist could put a drop in someone's eye legally was in Rhode Island in 1971. In 1973, nobody could treat with eye drops. Well, it turned out that therapeutic pharmaceutical agents, since I'm in there already, why don't I just put some drops to make sure if they have glaucoma, I can treat it. If they have an eye infection, I can treat it. And in 1973, they passed laws. 1986, an optometrist couldn't bill Medicare. You get the point. They went from not being able to do anything to now. And this is how they did it. They developed an educational program, added content to the training of their students. They offered continuing education, demonstrated competency. They went to the legislature and started passing laws. And there were people that didn't want them to pass those laws. Medical doctors, ophthalmologists, they were furious. They said, you're not a real doctor. You can't do that. But when the medical doctors and the medical establishment and the ophthalmologists posed their argument, and the optometrists with their education and their evidence, and they went with theirs, it turns out the optometrists were right. And the ophthalmologists at one point, I remember their stories about them saying people are going to go blind, people are going to die. That has not come to fruition. Sometimes the people fighting against you to make new laws that will be beneficial sometimes will use scare tactics, even if they're not 100% accurate. Now, 50 states allow people to treat glaucoma. 50 states prescribe oral meds. 43 allow you to do oral steroids. You can do injectables. 10 allow you to optometrists to perform laser surgery. Why? Because they went to the lawmakers, put it in the education, showed they have the training, have the background, have the experience. And now I would guess that that number will go up in the next couple of decades, next couple of years. So this is what I wanted to say. So again, if optometrists can do that, if nurses can do that, if registered pharmacists can do that, why can't opticians? What could opticians? I want you to think about what an optician can do in the future if all the states all got on the same page and could all bring it up to the profession and do what they think they should do. So again, support legislation that helps professions' ability to support. One of the key goals, your organized professional groups, the AMA, American Medical Association, the American Optometric Association, AOA. Opticianry has the group, the Opticians Association of America. The group should be to help the profession. In recent years, the opticians have not been very helpful, but I believe that's going to change with some changes that are on the horizon. The key goals of your professional groups, both on a state level and a national level, are support legislation that helps the profession's ability to serve the public and improve public health, and to fight against legislation that will damage that profession's ability to serve patients. It's not about you making more money. It's not about you being able to pay your student loans. It's not about you being able to afford a second house. It's literally about you doing good by the patients, increasing their access to care, quality care, and you will win more often than you will lose. And again, I like these pictures. There's my guys in Tammy Duckworth in Washington, D.C. We go and visit folks. And so now I'm going to sort of finish up with, not only can we have laws that give opticians or other professions the ability to increase their scope or help people, but you can have them deregulate. We have been fighting in Ohio and Virginia and North Carolina and Connecticut recently, people trying to either weaken or destroy the laws that allow opticians to serve their clientele and their patients and be very valuable members of the healthcare profession. You need to get involved. This is why you have to join an association. The association has to have lobbyists. Support your state and national associations. This was us going to Ohio. This was a big one. They almost lost their license in Ohio, but these group of people went through and argued, and we won. There's a great story about this. We don't have time for it, but this is one of my favorite things I've ever done. Mention on dues. Most unions or dues, they'll say pay 1% of your gross. I've heard people say with opticians, I can't afford to pay my dues. Well, your dues in the state of Connecticut for some of the associations are like $200. It's less than 1% of your take home. It is a very wise investment. I would suggest that you pay it. And I'll go over these another time. Just read through them. If you have any help with those, that's fine. Here's my take home for the alphabet soup. Take home here. Know the following. FDA, Federal Drug Administration, is for impact resistance of eyeglass lenses. They also control contact lens solutions, contact lenses. You get it because it's a safety patient issue. FTC, they create and enforce to increase competition. They create and enforce the eyeglass rule, and they also enforce the Federal Contact Lens to Consumer Acts. That's a federal law, but the FTC enforces it. OSHA, you know who OSHA is. They have workplace safety. They include eye and face protection, and they use ANSI Z87. Health and Human Services, they enforce the HIPAA rule, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, but it has a lot of access and privacy rules. American National Standards Institute, they do the voluntary professional standards unless they're adopted. We have Z80 that's adopted for accuracy of glasses and lenses. A state can adopt it. Connecticut has. Z87, voluntary, except it was adopted by OSHA, and ASTM is sports eyewear. That was a freaking ton. I didn't want it to go quite this long. I apologize for that. I normally want to do bite-sized pieces, but this is our intro, and this is an important aspect. We are going to also, throughout the course of the semester, if you look in your handout, look into your, actually, we'll do it right now. Let's share the video. And let's go after your that was your other class. Don't sweat that one. Don't have it. So let me call it up. I'm going to show you in our Blackboard in the 122 class. And this is maybe the most important thing of the whole lecture, and maybe I'll separate it out, but you got to watch these things, guys. And I apologize this one's as long as it is. I know you guys, me especially, not you guys. Some people have the attention span of a squirrel, like I do, or a chipmunk. However, we're going to go into courses. We're going to go into 112. There is obviously, if you go into the course content, there's all of Brian's stuff, Professor Goes, and there's all of my stuff in my didactic folder. Every unit, I need you to look in here, and all the learning material is here. Here's the slides from today. Here's more stuff on HIPAA that we're going to go over in the next couple days, next couple weeks. An article on all the 3 O's, the State of Opticianry article, and this is the most important. I'm actually going to move it up a little bit because it's so important. What is this? We have state rules, both statutes passed by the state legislature and regulations passed by the Department of Public Health that govern what you can and can't do and what the rules and regulations are about you being an optician in the state of Connecticut. And here they are. Chapter 381 of the General Statutes, everything there is to learn about the rules regarding opticianry are here. Secondly, the Department of Public Health has also put forth a number of regulations to allow the Department of Public Health to administer the laws regarding opticianry. These are the state regulations. These you are bound by as a licensed optician when you get your license. And they have optical record retainment. They have what you need to open up an optical shop, the equipment that you need. I'm not going to go over these currently. What I'm going to do is make sure that you know where they are. I want you to start looking at them, and over the course of the semester, we're going to continue to delve into them. We're going to pick them apart. We're going to dissect them so that by the end of the semester, you will know them inside and out. And you will be tested on these for the state licensing exam. This is something you should not fail. Please, for the love of God, don't fail this. It's easy. You read them, you take it. This should not be the reason you fail. That would hurt my feelings. So you have the whole semester to work on this. We'll continue to work with you. So how do you practice? Why are there laws? Why are they important? Who are the big players? How do we change laws or make laws? And which laws specifically in the state of Connecticut apply to us? It was a lot, but I will argue that this is maybe one of the most important lectures we have of your entire career because you need to know this stuff. That's it for today. We're going to end it here. We're going to start meeting every Wednesday. You're welcome to tag along, but even if you don't, we're going to tape this and send it to you so you can watch it. I'll give you the PowerPoints. I'll give you the resources, and there's going to be some homework. I'll send you the link on how to do the homework. Just make sure you get it done. And I think that's it. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the evening. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you next unit.